Welcome to Alignment, using your values to invest in social change, brought to you by Oikocredit US. We're proud to bring you this second in our series of interviews with experts in the field of values-based investing. I'm Matt Eldridge, CEO of Oikocredit US.
And I'm Sara Shoff, Chief Operating Officer of Oikocredit US. We are delighted to have as our special guest today the CEO of the impact investing organization, Upaya Social Ventures, Kate Cochran. Before we introduce Kate, just a quick word about who we are. Oikocredit US is the nonprofit US affiliate of Oikocredit International, a 45-year-old global cooperative that works to improve living conditions in low-income countries. Oikocredit does so by investing in microfinance and small and medium enterprises in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Our job here at Oikocredit US is to raise awareness and financial support in North America for these efforts.
We're thrilled today to speak with Kate Cochran. Kate is a seasoned executive in the impact investing space. She's an expert in finding scalable market-based solutions to social problems and has held leadership roles at international development organizations such as Unitas, Vitana, and now Upaya. Kate holds an MBA from UCLA and a BA from the Leland Stanford Junior University, my alma mater as well, which is where we first met.
Today, we'll ask Kate a number of prepared questions, then we'll open to the floor to questions we've received from supporters like you around the country.
Kate, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Oikocredit has been a trailblazer in this field for so long that it's really an honor to be here.
Thanks, Kate. Well, and as you know, I've had the pleasure of knowing you since college, which, as we both know, was just the other day. We also worked in Washington, D.C. at the same time, and through some cosmic coincidence, we're now both in the Seattle area and both working for amazing nonprofits in the impact investing space. As we mentioned, and let me make sure I get this right, Upaya Social Ventures invests in early stage growing businesses in India to, quote, create dignified jobs for the poorest of the poor. Kate, what does that mean exactly? What is Upaya and what is it that you do?
Yeah, it's a great question because Upaya is unique in what we do. We focus our work on, when we say the poorest of the poor, sometimes it's known as the ultra poor, but the people who are generally considered too vulnerable for microfinance. So this is a very vulnerable population. And we were founded on the belief that they didn't need handouts or they didn't want handouts, that what they really wanted was reliable income. They wanted jobs. So Upaya was founded 10 years ago, actually, with the idea that we would invest in companies that could create jobs for the poorest of the poor. So we are a nonprofit organization, but we make returnable investments into companies that can create these jobs.
Here at Oikocredit US, we sometimes get asked, why is it hard for entrepreneurs, kind of like you were just describing, to get money to grow their business? So the entrepreneurs you're helping in India, why can't they just take out a loan? Why do they need funding from an organization like Upaya or Oikocredit?
Yeah, I think that, the entrepreneurs we work with in India have very similar challenges to entrepreneurs here in the United States. If you don't already come with wealth from your family or from your network, it can be very hard to access affordable investment. So when you are starting a business, if you don't already have collateral, it can be very hard to get a bank loan. And the companies that we work with often aren't eligible for bank loans. And while there are some entities that will lend to companies without collateral, they're paying very high interest rates, 18 to 22%. And when you're just trying to get a company off the ground, that kind of interest really hobbles growth. So these companies need the kind of patient capital that can allow their company to flourish. And that's what Oiko and Upaya can offer.
So you're looking at a company in India and you have to due diligence a company before providing them a loan. How do you do that homework before making an investment? Are you worried about corruption? How do you make sure the business is an ethical one?
Sure. And one thing I should say is we do not generally lend money. We make equity investments. But your point is absolutely right. We spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs before we make our investments, because when you make an early stage investment, really most of the company is about the entrepreneur, their vision, their abilities, and their motivations. And so we have a team in Bangalore who do this due diligence. It often takes several months before we make a decision to make that investment, and having that local team get to know the entrepreneur, evaluate the market is the crucial step to what we do.
Kate, as CEO at Upaya, you're running one of the leading organizations in the impact investing arena. And impact investing isn't exactly new to you. Before Upaya, you worked at Unitas and then Vitana. What inspired you to get involved in impact investing? What makes Kate Cochran tick?
So that's a long story, but I won't tell all of it. Matt, as you know, when I was in college, I was not heading to international development. I certainly was not heading to finance. I actually thought I was heading to the arts, and I took a wrong turn somewhere. What happened was I went to business school to get the skills to run a theater, actually, and a funny thing happened. I really fell in love with the discipline of business. I saw its ability to make scalable change. And this is in the late 90s when the idea of social enterprise was just beginning to be formed. Impact investing was not anywhere near as mainstream as it is now. But it sort of was appealing to me. And a few years after I graduated, in a complete fluke, lucky turn of events for me, I was invited to a fundraiser by another Stanford alum, because he had founded a microfinance organization. And I was curious, and I went not thinking for professional reasons at all. I just was curious to learn about this concept of microfinance. And this is back in 2003. And I was hooked. I saw the potential of microfinance to really make scalable change. And so that was my first segue into the industry. And I realized, if you're working in global poverty, which is a problem which is measured in hundreds of millions of people, there are a lot of wonderful programs that are reaching people in the hundreds or thousands, and that's not going to really move the needle. But microfinance had the potential to make really scalable change. And so I was with that organization until 2010. Then was very fortunate to spend time working in education microfinance all around the world. And at the same time, had joined the board of this organization called Upaya that was aiming to help the population that was too vulnerable for microfinance. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
That's a great journey, Kate. It's funny you mentioned fundraisers. I still fondly recall the Upaya fundraising gala that I attended not long after you started there 5 years ago. It was a blast. There were hundreds of donors. You raised a bunch of money, and even though Upaya had solid momentum then, since then it's doubled its revenues and increased fivefold the number of jobs created to what's now more than 25,000. What's the secret, would you say, to Upaya's success?
The founders had this brilliant idea to invest in entrepreneurs in order to create jobs for the poor. And as far as we know, no one else was doing anything like that. And so I think of the first 5 years of Upaya as the time that they used to test that theory, that there were such entrepreneurs out there, and then hone our investment thesis into what kinds of companies we should be investing in, which ones could create jobs at significant scale, and which ones would also be financially viable. So that was the first 5 years of experiments. I came onto the staff from the board in 2016 with a mandate from our board to say, okay, take all of these lessons and let's consolidate them and build an organization that can scale and that can grow. And so I think of our last 5 years as doing just that. We have gotten more focused in the kinds of companies we invest in. We have launched an accelerator, which is a wonderful way to work with more companies than we can invest in, but also get to know those companies even better before we invest. And so, to me, I think, everything we do needs to touch on the job holders. And so now, as you mentioned, we've really grown that number. We've just crossed 25,000 jobs, but I think we're just getting started. There's huge opportunity in front of us. So, what I didn't really answer your question directly. I think the secret of the success is clearly the entrepreneurs. That's all the stuff that was happening in the background with Upaya. But fundamentally, those 25,000 people are employed by our portfolio companies, and what we've gotten better at is finding the right entrepreneurs, and then trying to find out exactly what they need and give it to them, and then get out of their way. So, the other part of this equation that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, and I'm glad that you brought up that gala, which was a lot of fun. Fundamentally, investing is a money business. And, to be an investor, you have to have capital, and we're not successful if we don't. We've been remarkably fortunate, I think, particularly in the last 5 years, that donors see what we do, and they are really taken by the way it can scale and the leverage in the model. That this isn't a one-time infusion of capital that then needs to be followed up and followed up and followed up. It's a one-time infusion of capital that has a great impact, that builds a sustainable business, and then comes back to us, and then we can invest in another company. So we've been really fortunate to have generous donors helping to fuel this kind of growth.
So in 2021, we've seen the impact of COVID-19 to increase in India, where you're focused. Analysis this month suggests that possibly more than 1 million people have died in India from COVID-19. At the same time, analysts are also saying that there's Indian companies uniquely posed for growth and sort of help economic recovery. How has the pandemic affected Upaya's investees and your organization, and what does the future hold for you in that aspect?
Yeah, I won't sugarcoat it. 2021 has been horrific in India. It's kind of one of those rare times where some of the really sensationalist journalism that you read is actually accurate. And I think that when I look at my friends and my colleagues and our partners in India, there's nobody who hasn't lost a family member. So it has been a hard year to get through. On the other hand, what we saw at the beginning of this pandemic, and nobody knows why India was spared at the beginning of the pandemic and then hit so hard this year, but we saw tremendous opportunity and positive signs from our portfolio in the first 6 months of the pandemic. We did a survey of job holders in the summer of last year. So the pandemic had been going on for 3 or 4 months. There had been a really, really hard lockdown in India. Most of our companies were not earning any revenue. And we were, bracing ourselves for some really hard results coming back to find out how the job holders were doing. And what we learned really surprised us. 2/3 of them were being paid by their companies, even though the company wasn't earning any revenue. The companies were doing whatever they could to hold on to their job holders. And this was both out of altruism and also as business people. And so these people who had jobs with a company were doing better than micro entrepreneurs who were completely on their own when the lockdown happened. So I think that this point about businesses being poised for growth and to be able to take off again when the economy starts, we're already seeing that now, even after the second wave. The second quarter reporting for this year, we've seen a huge dip, but we are hearing from our companies that in the third quarter, they're seeing revenue pick up again. They are reconnecting their supply chains. So, I'm an optimist by nature. but we really do believe that they're getting back onto firm ground. And one thing that we did last year is we believe so much in this model of investing in the companies that can provide economic opportunity. We made 9 investments in the middle of the pandemic. So many other entrepreneurs or so many other investors are saying, okay, it's now time to just sit back and watch and wait for things to settle down. And we wanted to help and stabilize companies that probably were going to have a hard time in the pandemic, but that could create jobs as soon as the recovery happened. So our portfolio is really big right now compared to where it's been, but we're really pleased by that and seeing signs for optimism.
So impact investing is tricky in part because measuring impact can be really difficult. How does Upaya measure impact, and how has that kind of gone, for the last 5 or so years, and looking to the future of what does impact for Upaya mean?
Yeah, and you know what? I'll take it all the way back to 10 years for us. Impact measurement is hard, and everybody should understand that. We have a secret weapon at Upaya. One of our co-founders is an absolute global expert in impact management, and she founded Upaya with a commitment to always collecting information to make sure that our theories of how we were going to be improving people's lives were actually borne out by the data. So we've been collecting job holder surveys from the very beginning, and every time we make an investment, we do a sample study to learn what kinds of incomes these job holders had before, what they are earning then, but even more than that, how is this changing their lives? Where are they investing this money? Is it into more reliable housing or nutrition? Very often it is education for their children. Also very often it is a cell phone. It's their first purchase after getting this job. And then we come back 2 years later, because it's not enough just to get a job. What we're looking for is stability and reliability. And we want to see evidence that they are on a trajectory where maybe there is a career path there. So we do follow-up surveys. And so that's the first thing that we look at is the job holder level, because that's the core to who we are. But the second level is, how are we as an investor making choices? We look at our impact data to tell us what kinds of companies should we be investing in, which companies are providing better jobs than other companies. And I think that that's a really crucial thing that sometimes gets missed by nonprofit organizations. They think impact management is something that they do for donors. And absolutely, we are happy to share our story with donors, good and bad. And we think that they have every right to know what we're learning. But fundamentally, to me, it is about helping us do our job better. So we have a dashboard on our website that anybody is welcome to go to. It gets updated every quarter when we get new reporting from our portfolio, and it shows how incomes are improving or not. In the middle of COVID, there is a drop. There's a drop in job numbers, and there's a drop in income. So that's how we do it. I think that the industry is catching up to our way of thinking, which I think is wonderful. And the next mode that we need to get into is clearer metrics and standardization. And there's good movement in that direction, but it's hard work and it's going to take some time.
Oh, that's great to know, Kate. It's good to know just the level of focus that you've had on measuring, on figuring out what to measure, measuring it, and then so transparently sharing that information through a dashboard on your website. That's fantastic. Upaya is working for change abroad at a time when last year's murder of George Floyd accelerated conversations here in the US about equity and inclusion. And a lot of donors and foundations have stepped up. They're channeling more capital in this direction. How do you respond to donors who say, we have so many needs here at home, so much inequity and poverty, I'm going to focus on making a difference domestically?
So my response is it's not either or. I agree. The challenges that the United States are facing in terms of race and wealth inequity are dramatic. They are urgent. I personally volunteer with an organization called Community Credit Lab that is about identifying ways to get capital into the hands of people who need economic opportunity in a way that's non-exploitative. And I'm really proud of the work that they're doing, and I'm trying to learn from that. So my own personal resources are going in multiple places, and I think other people can do that too. For me personally, I spend my days focused on poverty abroad because there are so many people on this earth who don't have a fraction of the opportunity that even the most marginalized members of our society do. I normally tell people that there are places with no safety net, where if you are extremely poor, you could just die from extreme poverty. And unfortunately, that happens day in and day out. And I applaud people who are putting their efforts and their wealth into trying to resolve inequity in our country. But I'd say that, it's not just one thing. There's a lot of inequity across the world.
Thanks, Kate. And that's a great shout out for Community Credit Lab. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of another nonprofit called Realize Impact, and we're partnering with Community Credit Lab, and I know those folks as well, and they're doing fantastic work. So thanks for mentioning that. Upaya has been a pioneer in the use of so-called recoverable grants. You raised an initial pool of $1 million in recoverable grants in 2019. And now, just a couple months ago, you announced you're raising a second pool of $3 million. You've inspired others to follow suit, like us at Oikocredit, and we're now raising $3.5 million in recoverable grants. For folks who aren't familiar with recoverable grants, Kate, what the heck are they, and why would someone want to give one?
They aren't as complicated as they might sound. They are essentially a philanthropic grant, just like everybody is familiar with. It's a grant, but in the contract, there's a trigger. And if that trigger happens, then the donor can ask for their money back and have a right to get their money back. And the trigger can be positive or negative. In our case, it's positive. If we invest in companies that do well and pay our investment back, then that is the trigger for us to pay our foundations back. So it is a relatively simple to execute form of impact investing that seems to be attracting a lot more attention right now.
But can anybody make a recoverable grant? This is something that we've looked at and we would love more understanding from you, because I understand that foundations, because of their tax exempt status, can make a recoverable grant and get it back, but can individuals do that? And sort of how does that work? Yeah,
so because when a donor makes a donation, they, as an individual, often take a tax deduction. Individuals cannot make recoverable grants, because if you made a donation and took a deduction and then got the money back, that would not work well for the IRS. But what an individual can do is open up a donor advised fund. And for a long time, I think donor advised funds were sort of perceived to be for very, very wealthy people. And now they're quite democratized. Lots of people can open up a donor advised fund. And what would happen then is the donor would place money into the fund. The donor advised fund would place the recoverable grant. When it came back, the money would stay with the fund, but then the donor would be able to make other donations out of that same fund. And so it traps the capital in the into the philanthropic world. It can only be used for good from that point, but typically that's what the donor wants to do anyhow.
Kate, you travel a lot to India, or at least you did in the before times. I once traded messages with you during a stopover in Amsterdam. And over your 5 years of seeing Upaya's results in the field, what have you witnessed that's made the biggest impression on you?
First of all, I remember that exchange in Amsterdam. I think we were talking about stroopwafels. Um, but in terms of, the impressions that India has made on me, and I should say, going back to what I said earlier, that I didn't expect that this was going to be my career path. 2004 was the first time I ever went to India. And it was also the first time I ever went to a developing country of any kind. So I was very, very wide-eyed spending time there. What struck me at the time, and that I was working in microfinance then, and what strikes me now is most of the time that I get to go to India, I'm spending time with entrepreneurs in our portfolio. And I'm getting to know their businesses, and I'm talking with their job holders. And, if you spend time with any entrepreneurs, they are relentlessly optimistic and energetic and honestly kind of fun. But the biggest impression that I always take away from these trips is their resilience and their energy in the face of challenges that it is hard to convey. They are working in areas with really challenging infrastructure often. And India is, renowned for its complicated bureaucracy and, delays in getting things done, and yet they push through. Even, in a crisis like last year, they not only protected their companies, they protected their job holders. And I find that kind of resilience just inspiring. And I see it time and time again every time I go.
Kate, this is Upaya's 10-year anniversary. And, as you've described the organization, it's clear it has a lot to be proud of. When you think about the difference that Upaya has made in the world, what gives you the greatest sense of accomplishment?
So I have to give credit where credit is due. When Sachi Shenoy, who is one of our co-founders, came to me 11 years ago, and she said she had this idea for a way to sustainably uplift the extreme poor by investing in a portfolio of companies that would employ them, my honest reaction was, that sounds so hard. And I'm really glad she didn't listen to me. I joined her board and I offered to help in any way, but I was worried that we wouldn't find entrepreneurs who shared this vision, or that they wouldn't do well enough to ever pay back our investment. I think that the unique value that Upaya brings to this conversation about impact investing and how we confront extreme poverty is you can make a meaningful difference by believing in the resourcefulness and dignity of the poor. They're reliable workers. Companies that they are working for are strong and stable and growing. They don't need handouts. They just need opportunity. In impact investments, we don't need to be aiming for unicorns. If we can recycle our capital after helping one company grow and stabilize and employ thousands of people, then do the same thing for another company. That's a model that we are really proud of and that we'd like to see other companies, other investors adopt.
Thanks, Kate. Let's go to some questions that our supporters sent in before our conversation today. Amber?
Thanks, Sarah. The first question we have for you, Kate, is what's the biggest reason people don't make values aligned or impact investments today? And how can we change that?
Yeah, I think that the biggest reason is just lack of awareness of the opportunities available. I've been around long enough that I remember conversations about how only accredited investors can have access to certain kinds of deals and certain kinds of equity funds. And wouldn't it be great if we could be on a mainstream platform? And then Calvert came along. Now we have, a huge proportion of the Fortune 500 talking about ESG. Now, whether they are doing ESG in a totally consistent, authentic way, it's still a process. And so I think that there's a lot of information out there. It's not just for, the high net worth investors now. And in fact, by mobilizing the savings of, most of us, we can have a much bigger impact if we align our investing with our values.
All right, our next question is, which investment that Upaya has made resonates the most with you personally?
This is a really hard question. It's not exactly like asking my favorite child, but different entrepreneurs, sort of strike different chords. But there's one company in our portfolio, and it was a relatively early investment. So I was on the board, but I wasn't on staff when the decision was made to make this investment. But I've gotten to know the entrepreneur pretty well since then. And they are based in Assam, which is in Northeast India, and it's a pretty remote, pretty under-resourced area. And the entrepreneur has an MBA. He could do so many things with his life. He is super smart, and he's committed to bringing economic opportunity to the people who live in his region. And he started started working for a nonprofit, but he saw a business opportunity. And this is what happens with a lot of our entrepreneurs. And that the opportunity was to create biodegradable, environmentally good disposable dinnerware. He makes plates out of palm leaves that naturally fall to the forest floor. And he hires people to go collect the raw material. And he has built these presses, and he's trained people to be able to make the plates, make them hygienic. He's now selling to Europe, to the United States, to Australia. And so it sounds like a wonderful story of, and everything worked out really well. It's certainly not. He has at times employed 4,500 people, and at times that has fallen back down to 2,000. The pandemic was really hard on him, especially for the supply chain disruptions and for his exports. And yet, through all kinds of challenges, he has stuck through it in ways that I, in all honesty, couldn't imagine myself doing. Like at some point I would have said, my life could be easier than this, and I would have walked away, I think. And yet he hasn't. And I feel like he is the entrepreneur I think of when I have a bad day. And I'm like, yeah, this is nothing compared to, what he has been pushing through and coming out on top of. So that's the company. And by the way, I should say it's called Pommel Plates is the name of the company.
That's a really inspiring story. Our next question is, how has making impact investments on behalf of Upaya changed your life?
Yeah, so, when Matt and I were in college, if somebody had asked, are you going, what do you think about global poverty and our ability to change it? I probably would have given some sort of smarmy answer about corruption, about the scope of the problem is beyond our ability to do anything, and all of these big aid programs haven't actually changed it. And, I would have just had a very resigned attitude. Now, it is very sad, but we can't really do anything. Making these investments and seeing families, in the thousands escape from extreme poverty has given me so much more optimism. Muhammad Yunus used to say, we need to put poverty in a museum. And I love that image, but I also think it's true. I think it's totally possible. So that's how it's changed my life.
Our next question is there a specific sector or company that you see having the most impact in India through the job creations you focus on?
Yeah, there are a couple that are particularly interesting to us. The first, of course, is agribusiness. So many of the world's poor are smallholder farmers. And so if we invest in a company that either processes their food and processes in a way that they get more of the end price, that can be really meaningfully valuable to them. So agribusiness is a huge part of it. The other, which might be a surprise to some listeners, is waste management. I think we all have an image of really sad, like rag pickers. That's, the expression that you hear of, people who are so desperate that they are looking to recycle through garbage. we've invested in a couple of companies that are trying to change that paradigm. They're trying to address the waste problems in India by deploying an army of uniformed, safety-trained employees who have dignified jobs in managing waste and in increasing the amount of recycling that is available. So those are companies that are creating jobs in the thousands. So those are two sectors we're really interested in.
How does Upaya fit into a gender lens investing? What % of your entrepreneurs are women?
Yeah, great question. In 2017, we launched a new strategic plan, and we made a commitment at that point that of our active portfolio, we would always have gender balance. And for 4 years, we managed to keep that without taking any extraordinary steps. Right now, we are out of balance. We have 16 active companies in our portfolio, and 10 are led by men and 6 by women. So that means that next year we're going to make a more concerted effort to get things back into balance. But just to, that's about 35% women, female founders. To put that in context, in India, you hear different numbers, but it's between 2 and 6% of investment go to female founders. So we're definitely bucking the trend. We're really committed to backing women entrepreneurs because they are often overlooked. In fact, right now we are running an accelerator that is exclusive to female founders. And we are working with women to help them understand, are there times when they hold themselves back, when they are not as confident, or when they are not describing their companies with the same level of assurance that maybe some of their male entrepreneurs are, and that is a hindrance to their ability to get investment. So we're working with them on that. So we really do believe that, if you don't take an intentional gender lens approach to investing, then nothing's going to change.
I couldn't agree more. Is your strategy the same for this current fundraiser, India and job creation? Any changes with a bigger portfolio?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is largely yes, but not entirely. There are a few changes in this new pool of recoverable grants. And by the way, when we say pool, it means that all of the donors are going to share the risk together of the portfolio we put together with this investment. So the biggest change is we are leaving open the possibility that we will invest outside of India. We're exploring that question, and we're going to make a decision about it next year. So that is, it's absolutely going to be job creation, but maybe beyond India as well as India. The other thing that we are looking at is we have traditionally made one investment into a company and then helped link them to other investors as they grow. We expect that we will probably reserve some of our money in this pool to do follow-on investments into the companies that we see really growing quickly and where we see that the investment is going to pay off very well, so that we can increase the probability that we're returning money to our donors.
Kate, that's very exciting, both the potential for follow-on funding, but also the possibility that you might look at other regions. For Oikocredit, we work in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and as you know, there are tremendous needs across all of those regions. So that's exciting to know that's something you're taking a close look at. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in, those of you who are tuning in, and to those of you who send in questions. And thank you, Kate, for joining us in this series of interviews we're calling Alignment, Using Your Values to Invest in Social Change.
Please join us at this same time on Wednesday, August 25th for our next interview in the Alignment series. We'll be talking with one of the founding team members of Root Capital and now a lecturer at Yale School of Management, Namrita Kapoor. Namrita is going to tell us about the sustainable finance landscape, how it's changed over the past couple of decades, and where she sees some of the biggest opportunities for people to make a difference with their investment in philanthropic dollars.
In the meantime, to learn more about Oikocredit US or how to support our impact in low-income countries, visit our website at oikocreditus.org. Until next time, on behalf of Sara and me and Amber and the whole team at Oikocredit US, thanks for your support. See you soon.